Have you ever thought that one man, with no backup, just his wits and a hidden trick, could destroy an entire gang? The Rojos thought they had trapped a lone drifter, but the real story was yet to unfold. Dear listeners, before we move forward, I have request to please subscribe my channel to hit 1,000 figure. The desert sun hung low, casting long shadows over the dust-choked streets of San Miguel. It was a town ruled by fear, where justice had been buried under greed and bullets. Two warring families, the Rojos and the Baxters, had turned the town into their battlefield, leaving nothing but broken homes and unmarked graves. And then Clint Eastwood arrived. A lone rider, his poncho draped loosely over his shoulders, his hat tilted just enough to hide the sharp glint in his eyes. No name, no past, just a quiet presence that carried the weight of something dangerous. He wasn't here for justice nor revenge. He was here for something simpler, an opportunity. From the moment he stepped into town, he could feel the tension. Eyes watching him, hands twitching near holsters. The Rojos ran the liquor trade, the Baxters controlled the guns, and neither side trusted an outsider. But that's exactly what he wanted. He watched, listened, and learned. In a town where alliances were as fragile as glass, he knew one thing. If you played both sides just right, you didn't need an army. You just needed patience and a plan. Clint Eastwood wasn't just another gunslinger passing through. He was a predator sizing up his prey. He spent his days lingering in the saloon, watching the Rojos and the Baxters tear each other apart, one double cross at a time. He dropped hints, whispered half-truths, and planted seeds of doubt, making sure both sides saw him as a useful pawn. But he wasn't just playing them. He was preparing for something bigger. One evening, he followed a group of Rojos unloading a wagon of stolen gold. Hidden in the shadows, he watched as they stashed it inside their compound, laughing like kings of the wasteland. He knew then, greed was their weakness, and if he played it right, it would be their downfall. By morning, the town was alive with rumors. A few Baxters had been found dead near the Rojos' hideout, and whispers spread that a betrayal was brewing. It was all falling into place. But Clint wasn't done yet. He needed one final edge, something that would make him untouchable in the fight to come. And so, that night, under the cover of darkness, he set his plan into motion. Clint Eastwood knew that walking into a gunfight against an entire gang was suicide. The Rojos were ruthless, and their bullets didn't miss. But he wasn't planning on fighting fair. As the town slept, he worked in silence. In an abandoned blacksmith shed on the edge of San Miguel, he found what he needed: scrap metal, old horseshoes, and thick iron plates. He knew that speed alone wouldn't save him when the time came. He needed something that would make him unstoppable. With careful hands, he hammered and shaped the metal into a chest plate, thick enough to stop a bullet, but slim enough to wear under his poncho without suspicion. It was crude, heavy, and uncomfortable, but it was the edge he needed. By dawn, his armor was ready. He slipped it under his poncho, adjusting the fabric to make sure it draped naturally. To any outsider, he still looked like the same lone drifter. But now, he was a ghost, one that wouldn't fall even when the bullets started flying. He stepped out into the dusty streets, the sun already beating down on the town like a relentless hammer. Word had spread. Don Miguel Rojo had figured out his betrayal. The Rojos would come for him. That was exactly what he wanted. Now, all he had to do was wait for the inevitable. The air in San Miguel felt different that morning, thicker, heavier, charged with the weight of something about to explode. The streets, once filled with drunken laughter and the chaos of rival gangs, were eerily silent. Doors remained shut, curtains drawn, as if the town itself was holding its breath. They knew. The Rojos had discovered Clint's deception. They had played his game long enough, believing he was their pawn, only to realize too late that they were the ones being played. Now, there was no more room for whispers or secret deals. This would be settled in blood. He stood in the middle of the street, his poncho swaying gently in the desert wind. He didn't move. He didn't need to. The Rojos would come, loud, angry, desperate to make an example out of him. And then, like a storm on the horizon, they appeared. Don Miguel Rojo himself led the charge, flanked by his best gunmen. Their boots pounded against the dirt, raising a cloud of dust as they spread out, surrounding him. Rifles were cocked, pistols drawn. A dozen barrels pointed at one man, standing alone. "You think you can make a fool of us?" Don Miguel's voice was thick with fury, his grip tightening on his revolver. "You played your last hand, amigo." Clint Eastwood didn't answer. He just stared, calm as ever, as if this was just another morning, just another job. His fingers hovered near his holster, but he didn't draw. "Any last words?" Don Miguel sneered. Still, silence. The old man who ran the inn peeked through a cracked window, his breath caught in his throat. The bartender ducked behind his counter, knowing what was coming. A group of frightened villagers huddled in a doorway, watching the inevitable unfold. And then, "Fire!" Don Miguel shouted. Gunshots shattered the silence. A dozen bullets tore through the air, slamming into Clint's chest. The force knocked him backward, sending him staggering. His poncho whipped around him, the impact kicking up a cloud of dust. For a moment, everything stopped. Then, he straightened. Gasps rippled through the air. He should have been dead. No man could take that many bullets and stand. The Rojos hesitated, eyes wide, fingers tightening around their triggers. A slow smile tugged at the corner of his lips. The metal plate beneath his poncho had done its job. The bullets had struck, but none had pierced his flesh. He wasn't a man anymore. He was something else, something unstoppable. And now, it was his turn. His hand moved like lightning, his revolver flashing in the sunlight. The reckoning had begun. The Rojos froze, disbelief painted across their faces. They had seen men shot before, many times, but never had they seen one take a barrage of bullets and still stand. Fear crept into their eyes, their fingers trembling over their triggers. For the first time, they weren't hunting. They were being hunted. Clint Eastwood didn't give them time to think. His revolver roared to life, spitting fire and steel. The first shot found its mark in the man to Don Miguel's left, a bullet slicing through his chest before he could even raise his gun. The second hit a gunman near the saloon, sending him sprawling into the dirt. The Rojos scrambled, their carefully crafted dominance crumbling into panic. Don Miguel gritted his teeth and fired again, aiming straight for the drifter's heart. The bullet struck, but again he didn't fall. The sound of metal catching lead rang out, confirming their worst fears. He was invincible. The realization shattered their will. Some turned to run, but the streets offered no refuge. Clint Eastwood moved with purpose, his gun an extension of his hand. Every shot was deliberate. Every bullet had a name. One by one, the Rojos fell until only Don Miguel remained. His gun was empty, his breath ragged. The powerful crime lord of San Miguel, who once commanded men with a snap of his fingers, now stood alone, his face slick with sweat. "You're a dead man," he whispered, though the threat carried no weight. Clint stepped closer, his boots crunching against the blood-soaked dirt. He leveled his gun, staring into the eyes of a man who had terrorized the town for years. "No," he said, his voice calm, final. "You are." One last shot rang out. Don Miguel Rojo collapsed, his empire reduced to nothing but dust and corpses. The silence returned to San Miguel, but it was different now. The weight of fear had lifted, the ghosts of violence beginning to fade. Doors creaked open, hesitant faces peeking out into the street. They had witnessed the impossible. A man standing against an army and winning. Clint holstered his revolver and turned. He walked toward his waiting horse, the metal plate beneath his poncho still warm from the fight. He had no reason to stay. He had no debts, no ties, no name. As he rode away, leaving San Miguel behind, the wind carried the whispers of those who had watched. Some called him a legend, others called him death itself. But all agreed on one thing. No one would ever forget the day Clint Eastwood walked into town and brought the Rojos to their knees.